I signed the papers. My own son smiled, convinced he had just stolen my $4 million home and successfully sent me away to a care facility. Across from me, my daughter-in-law was already scrolling through paint colors from my living room on her phone, acting as if the house was hers already. Neither of them had the slightest idea that the document they had just pressured me into signing was actually a trap I had laid with absolute precision. A trap that would soon ignite a federal fraud investigation, strip my son of his CEO title, and leave the two of them utterly bankrupt. Mom, this house is simply too much for you to handle now. Jason slid a glossy brochure across the linen tablecloth, pushing it right over my slice of birthday cake. Silver Pines Senior Living. Maya leaned in the heavy gold of her designer necklace, catching the chandelier light in the dining room. We really need the space, Evelyn. With the baby on the way and Jason needing the deed to secure funding for his new startup, this just makes sense. Honestly, you'll be so much happier with nurses around to take care of you. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply picked up my linen napkin, wiped my mouth with perfect calm, and looked at the two people who had already decided my life was over, just because I had turned 62. My name is Evelyn. I spent 30 years as a chief financial officer building wealth from nothing. But to my son, I was nothing more than an aging obstacle standing between him and the asset he wanted most. And before I tell you exactly how I destroyed their sense of entitlement, using the very laws they tried to weaponize against me, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had to remind ungrateful family members that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, make sure to like this video and subscribe. The dining room in my Westchester home used to smell like lemon wood polish and the fresh pine scent drifting from the grandfather clock in the hallway. But tonight, it smelled only of expensive anxiety. Maya sat across from me, her silk blouse worth thousands of dollars, looking completely out of place against my antique mahogany table. She wrinkled her nose and glanced around the room as if the walls themselves were collapsing. Then she tapped her perfectly manicured nails against the tabletop. Evelyn, you have to admit this place has a smell. It smells like old paper and dust. You can't possibly manage a house this large all by yourself anymore. It isn't safe. Jason quickly nodded and leaned forward. He didn't even glance at my birthday cake. He was looking at me with that rehearsed sincerity of a man trying to close a sale. Maya's right, Mom. We're only thinking about your health. Last winter you slipped on the front steps. What if you fall again when no one's around? Silver Pines Senior Living has medical staff on duty 24 hours a day. You'd have your own community there. You'd have friends your own age. I lowered my eyes to the glossy brochure Maya had just pushed beside my plate. On the cover were smiling elderly people playing chess in a sun-drenched courtyard that somehow still looked lifeless. Then I looked back up at my son. This was the same boy I had worked 80-hour weeks to put through private school. The same boy whose entire college tuition I had paid so he would never have to live under the crushing weight of student debt. And what about my house, Jason? I asked, my voice perfectly calm. What exactly happens to my house? Jason cleared his throat and adjusted the lapel of his expensive tailored suit. Well, that's the other part of this. My tech startup is about to close its Series B round. We're so close, Mom, but the investors want to see stronger collateral. If you sign the deed over to me, I can use the house as leverage. It would still stay in the family. We'd use the value of the property to protect the company and then use the company's profits to pay for your premium care at Silver Pines. It's the perfect solution for all of us. Maya smiled then, a tight, calculated smile, and lifted her glass of imported mineral water. And honestly, we really do need a fresh start before the baby arrives. This house has great bones, but it needs a full renovation. We're thinking of tearing out your husband's old study and turning it into a professional media room. They weren't asking for my permission. They were informing me. They sat at my table, eating the food I had prepared, drinking the wine I had paid for, calmly discussing how they would erase my existence in order to fund their luxury lifestyle. Jason looked at me with a softness that was somehow even more insulting because of how patronizing it was. It's time to let us take care of you, Mom. All you have to do is sign the power of attorney, and we'll handle the rest. The guests seated around the dinner table began to join in. Marcus, one of Jason's old business school friends, nodded in agreement as he cut into his steak. He said the real estate market was at the perfect peak and that holding on to a house that large was financially inefficient. Chloe, one of Maya's friends, chimed in with a voice coated in artificial sweetness. She said Silver Pines had a wonderful yoga studio for seniors and that I would absolutely love it. They spoke about me as if I weren't even there, as if I were some outdated piece of furniture that needed to be cleared out to make room for their bright and shining future. I paid no attention to Marcus or Chloe. I looked only at my son. Slowly I set my fork down on the porcelain plate. I lifted my linen napkin and gently touched it to the corner of my mouth. My silence changed the atmosphere in the dining room at once. The clinking of silverware gradually faded until the room fell still. I took a long, measured breath. Jason, I seem to remember making a very large investment in your future. About 13 years ago, I withdrew $200,000 from my retirement fund to pay your entire business school tuition in full. I worked 80 hours a week and cut back on every personal expense so you could graduate without carrying a single dollar of student debt. I always believed it was the best investment I had ever made, and now you're asking me to hand over the only roof I have left. Jason showed no embarrassment, no discomfort, not even a flicker of shame. Instead, he gave a faint smirk and lightly shook his head. He waved one hand as if brushing away a fly. Mom, that was in the past, he said in the smug, polished tone of an executive pitching a boardroom deal. That money was an outdated investment. Parents paying for their children's education is the bare minimum. We can't drag numbers from a decade ago into the present and let them interfere with current cash flow. My company needs leverage now. Someone with your background as a chief financial officer should understand that better than anyone. Your sacrifice already served its purpose. Now it's time for you to step aside and let me take over. Maya took a sip of wine and muttered that bringing up old financial matters at the dinner table was incredibly tacky. Then she glanced at her friends, silently asking for their approval. They all waited for me to break, to cry, to collapse in front of them. But I gave them no such satisfaction. Because in that moment I understood something with perfect clarity. The child I had poured my life into was gone, and the man sitting across from me now was nothing more than a stranger wearing my son's face, and carrying a greed so deep it had no bottom. Jason let out an irritated sigh. The fake patience finally evaporated from his face. He reached into Maya's designer handbag, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and dropped them hard onto the table. The sound cracked through the silent dining room. "This is a full financial power of attorney," Jason said, his voice now cold and absolute. It was no longer a request, no longer a suggestion. It was an ultimatum. All you have to do is sign the last page. My attorney has already prepared everything. I lowered my eyes to the sheets of paper, all clean white pages, filled with terms so predatory they barely bothered to hide what they were. "And if I refuse Jason?" I asked calmly. Jason placed both hands on the table and leaned toward me. His eyes were completely stripped of warmth. "If you refuse, then I'll have to do something I didn't want to do," he said. "I'll bring in my legal team and licensed psychologists. I'll petition the court to have you declared mentally unfit to manage your own assets. You're 62 years old. You live alone in a house that's far too large. You already slipped and fell on the front steps once. On legal paperwork, those details won't look good for you at all. Don't force me to take your authority away through the courts. This can happen quietly, or it can get very ugly. The choice is yours." The entire dining room stopped breathing. Maya leaned back in her chair with a smug little smile curling at the corner of her mouth. They thought they had finally cornered me. They thought this cruel threat would make an aging mother crumble under fear and humiliation. I looked directly into the eyes of the son I had brought into this world. There was no anger on my face, no panic, no trace of desperation. Slowly I reached out my hand. I picked up the gold-plated pen Jason had placed on the table. I removed the cap, and in front of the stunned faces of every guest in that room, I lowered the pen to the final page and signed my name with icy calm. The next morning I was awakened not by birdsong, but by the violent sound of a sledgehammer slamming into a wall. It was only 8 o'clock. I threw on my silk robe and hurried down the stairs. The deafening noise was coming from my late husband's study, and when I reached the doorway, I could barely believe what I was seeing. 3 broad-shouldered men in work jackets were tearing apart the oak bookshelves my husband had built with his own hands 20 years ago. The floor was covered in manuscripts, ledgers, and scattered keepsakes, and standing in the middle of that cloud of dust was Maya. She was dressed in an immaculate white designer athleisure set, holding an overpriced coffee in one hand and casually filming a live stream on her phone with the other. "Good morning, Evelyn," Maya said without even looking up from her screen. "We had to start early. The contractors charge by the hour, and I need this room cleared out before the weekend. I'm planning to repaint this entire wall a soft blush pink for the backdrop of my live streams. This study is far too dark. And honestly, it smells like old people." I froze in the doorway. "Maya," I said, my voice low and sharp, "what the hell are you doing in my house? Who gave you permission to destroy anything in here?" Maya slowly lowered her phone. She looked at me with that familiar mix of fake sympathy and naked arrogance. "Evelyn, Jason already explained this to you last night. This house is now under our full management. You signed the power of attorney, and Jason took it to the bank this morning. We need this space to build our future. This room is going to be my personal content studio." And while she kept talking, one of the workers stepped over to the antique mahogany desk. Without hesitation, he swept everything from the surface straight into a large black contractor's trash bag. I lunged forward. Too late. The crack of shattering glass split through the room. It was the crystal clock my husband had given me on our 15th wedding anniversary. It wasn't just a clock. It was the last precious thing I had kept on that desk to remind me of the years when our life together had still been full of love. I looked down at the glittering shards of crystal mixed in with the debris. My hands began to shake, not from fear, from the cold rising force of rage flooding through my veins. "Pick it up," I said, my voice low and cutting as a blade. "Right now." Maya let out a tired little scoff. She stepped forward and nudged the trash bag aside with the jeweled toe of her designer sneaker. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It was just some old worthless thing. I told the crew to throw out anything unnecessary. You can't take all this clutter with you to the nursing home. At Silver Pines, your room is only about 160 square feet. You should start getting used to living simply." Then she moved even closer, the sickly sweet perfume she wore filling the air between us. "Honestly, you should go upstairs and start packing now. Jason already scheduled the movers for next Tuesday morning. They'll take you, and your 2 suitcases, to your new place. And don't worry, we're being generous. We'll cover your first month there. Consider it our way of honoring our responsibilities." I slowly straightened to my full height and took one long, controlled breath. Less than 2 feet now separated me from this shameless woman. I looked directly into the eyes of my enemy. She truly believed that signed power of attorney was some kind of magic shield, something that could turn me into a homeless woman inside the very house I had bought outright with my own money. What she did not know was that this destruction, this desecration of that room, was the final nail in the financial coffin she had built for herself. "All right, Maya," I said, my voice completely calm without a trace of fear. For the briefest second, my sudden composure seemed to unsettle her. "Go ahead, tear it all apart if that's what you want. But remember this moment very carefully, because every single thing you're destroying today, you will pay for, down to the last cent in your bank account." Then I turned and walked out of the room without looking back. I left Maya standing there with that smug, defiant smile still on her face. She was certain I was nothing more than a confused old woman making empty threats. She had no idea. I was walking straight to my car to begin the most merciless financial slaughter she and my son had ever imagined. I left the house just after Maya started tearing into the second wall. I drove to Whole Foods. That place had always carried a strange kind of peace. Rows of perfectly stacked apples, the soft scent of warm bread in the air, the quiet rhythm of an ordinary morning. I picked up a few familiar things: a box of organic herbal tea, a fresh salmon fillet, a few lemons, simple, forgettable things for a Tuesday morning. Then I walked to the checkout counter. The cashier was David, a college student working part-time, the kind young man who smiled and greeted me every week without fail. "Your total is $48.25. "Ms. Evelyn," he said cheerfully. I pulled my familiar black credit card from my wallet and ran it through the machine. It beeped. But instead of the usual approval tone, the screen flashed a bright red message, "Declined." David frowned slightly. He wiped the chip with care and inserted it again. Another dry beep. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Evelyn, but this card isn't going through," he said awkwardly, clearly worried about embarrassing me. "It's probably just a bank system issue. Do you have another card you'd like to try?" I gave him a gentle smile. Oh, I must have forgotten to pay last month's balance. Old people do get forgetful. Then I took out another card, a debit card tied directly to my retirement account. I swiped it, declined again. Now David looked genuinely uncomfortable. He glanced at the customers waiting behind me, then back at me with open sympathy. "This one was declined to, ma'am. I can hold your basket at customer service while you call your bank if you'd like." I nodded and thanked the poor boy, then stepped into a quiet corner near the flower display. On the outside, I let myself look exactly like what they expected. A confused older woman, frightened and embarrassed hands trembling slightly as she dialed the bank. But inside my mind was razor sharp. I knew exactly what had happened. After a few minutes on hold, a customer service representative named Sarah answered. "Hello, this is Evelyn Sterling. I just tried to buy a few groceries, but all of my cards were declined. I made my voice as fragile and unsteady as possible." "Could you check and see what might be wrong for an old woman like me?" Sarah gently asked for my security information. I gave it to her. I heard the clicking of her keyboard, and then her tone changed. There was hesitation in it now, and pity. "Mrs. Sterling, our system shows that all of your personal accounts and credit cards were frozen at 9 o'clock this morning." "Frozen," I repeated, letting my voice crack just enough. "But why I haven't done anything?" Sarah let out a soft breath. "Ma'am, the system shows a legal hold was placed by your authorized representative, Mr. Jason Sterling. He personally brought a copy of a full financial power of attorney to the main branch this morning. He also activated the emergency medical protection clause." "Medical protection," I repeated. "Yes, ma'am." Her voice dropped even lower. "Mr. Sterling submitted documentation stating that you are showing signs of severe cognitive decline and are no longer capable of managing your own financial decisions. Under the protective provisions attached to that filing, the bank was required to suspend your direct access to all accounts. From this point forward, any withdrawal or card transaction must be authorized with Mr. Jason Sterling's signature. Jason didn't just want the house. He wanted to cut off my oxygen. He wanted me unable to buy a box of tea, a loaf of bread, or a single tank of gas so that I would be forced into total dependence on his mercy. It was a flawless financial suffocation strategy, the kind designed to crush the will of any elderly person it touched. He wanted me to call him in tears. He wanted me begging him to unlock my own life so I could survive. "I understand," I said. And just like that, my voice returned to its usual calm. "Thank you for telling me, Sarah. You've done your job very well." There was a pause. "Mrs. Sterling, are you all right?" she asked carefully. "I have never been better." And then I hung up. I stood there in the middle of the store, fluorescent light spilling down over bright bouquets of lilies. Jason thought he had disarmed me. He thought activating that power of attorney was the killing blow. What he didn't understand was that in the world of high-level finance, a document like that only works against small personal accounts and ordinary assets. It's the financial equivalent of proudly stealing a coin purse, while the person you robbed is sitting on top of a central bank. I walked past the customer service counter where David was still holding my basket. "You can put those things back, David," I said with a soft smile. "I just remembered I have a very important appointment I can't miss." Then I stepped through the supermarket's sliding glass doors. The cold wind caught the edge of my coat, but I didn't feel cold at all. I got into my old car, but I didn't start the engine. Instead, I reached into my handbag and pulled out my military-grade encrypted laptop. Jason's power of attorney had officially entered the federal banking system. His signature was now logged. So was the fraudulent medical declaration attached to it. The trap had closed, and the prey had just handcuffed itself to a financial fraud case without even realizing it. I sat motionless in my old car in the supermarket parking lot. I pressed the lock button on the door. The space inside the car fell completely silent. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Jason's number. It rang exactly 3 times before he answered. He didn't make me wait. He wanted to enjoy this moment. "Hi, Mom." Jason's voice came through the line without a trace of surprise. Behind him, I could hear the hiss of an espresso machine and the sharp clicking of computer keys from his startup office. He was sitting in the executive chair bought with the very money I had once sacrificed to save for him. "Jason," I said, keeping my voice low and flat. "I was just at the supermarket. Every one of my credit cards was declined. The bank told me you froze my accounts." Jason let out a sigh. A carefully constructed sigh designed to sound like a son burdened by painful responsibility. "Mom, I knew you'd call. The bank followed the proper procedure. I brought the power of attorney in this morning. I had to make a very difficult decision, but it was in your best interest. You're not thinking clearly anymore, and I can't allow you to keep harming yourself financially." "In my best interest," I repeated slowly. "You told the bank I'm suffering from severe cognitive decline. Based on what medical evidence Jason, our family doctor, documented your fall," he replied without hesitation. "And I'm your legal representative now. I had every right to activate the emergency protection clause. Just look at yourself. You live alone in a house that's far too large. You insist on holding on to old, worthless items. Those are obvious signs of mental deterioration. My investors need certainty. I can't let the family's assets be put at risk because of an elderly woman's stubbornness." I closed my eyes, not because I was hurt, because I was memorizing every word. He was digging his own grave with the sheer force of his arrogance. "So you've decided you have the right to take everything from me with a single signature," I said. "The house, my bank cards, my retirement money, all of it." "It's not taking Mom. It's asset management," Jason said in the patronizing tone of a man explaining something simple to a child. "I'll cover all your living expenses. You won't have to worry about bills anymore. Actually, Maya and I discussed all of this very carefully. We've decided to give you a fixed weekly allowance. From now on, I'll load $100 a week onto a prepaid debit card for you. That's more than enough for groceries and little things." $100 a week, I said. 40 years of work, 15 years as a chief financial officer, and now my own son has decided my life is worth $100 a week. "You don't need more than that," Jason continued. "Utilities and major expenses will be paid directly by us. It's not like you need designer clothes or expensive restaurants. Maya is right. Older people only need the basics. You should learn to live more modestly. Besides, once you move into the care facility next week, all your meals will already be included. Honestly, you probably won't even need that $100 anymore." The coldness in his voice made the air inside the car feel frozen. He felt no guilt. To him, I was nothing more than a solved financial problem, a cost center to be minimized so his own profits could expand. "And what if I need to buy someone a birthday gift?" I asked. "What if I want to travel? What if I need new clothes?" I asked, only to see how far this shamelessness really went. Jason gave a faint laugh. His delusion of power had reached its highest point. "Mom, you're 62 years old. You don't need to travel. You don't need new clothes. You need to accept reality. Your time has passed. This is my time now. I'm building a tech empire, and I need every resource available. You should feel proud knowing your assets are finally being used for something greater than sitting in a bank account collecting dust." I went silent for a few seconds. I listened to the steady sound of his breathing through the phone. He was waiting for me to break, waiting for me to cry, waiting for me to beg him to loosen the noose. He wanted me to ask him for a little mercy, but I was never his prey. "Are you finished explaining, Jason?" I asked, my voice completely calm. He paused for a fraction of a second. My composure had clearly caught him off guard. "Yes, Mom. I suggest you go home and start packing. Maya is clearing out the study. Don't make things harder for her. This afternoon I'll have my assistant drop off your prepaid $100 card. Be smart with it." "Thank you, Jason," I said. "Thank you for making everything so very clear. You've shown me exactly who you are. I will never forget this phone call." And then I hung up before he could say another word. I set the phone down on the passenger seat. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. They thought they had stripped me of every weapon I had. What they didn't understand was this. In the world of high finance, rage is for amateurs. I reached over and opened my black laptop. The screen lit up, reflecting coldly in my eyes. That phone call had not been a defeat. It was a perfect indictment. Jason had just confessed his motive. He had admitted to using a fabricated medical claim to seize control of my assets. He had admitted to financial coercion in order to force me out of my own home. Everything was moving exactly along the path I had calculated. And now the old wolf was finally stepping out of the shadows. After I ended the call, the silence inside my old Buick turned thick and heavy. The confused, frightened, resigned expression of a helpless old woman vanished completely. I straightened my back. I adjusted the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me was not some pitiful elderly widow waiting to be shipped off to a nursing home. It was the face of a woman who had once overseen mergers worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It was the face of someone who never survived Wall Street by being soft. For 30 years, I had served as the chief financial officer of a global logistics corporation. I had stared down hostile takeovers. I had slashed massive budgets with my own hand and gone toe-to-toe with men twice as ruthless as my son and far less intelligent. I had built an empire out of spreadsheets, sleepless nights, and instinct sharpened by fire. Jason thought my world revolved around baking cookies and knitting sweaters. He believed that because that was exactly what I had chosen to let him see. I wanted him to have a real mother, not a corporate shark. And perhaps that was my greatest mistake. He mistook maternal love for the confusion of old age. I leaned down beside the passenger seat and pulled out a titanium briefcase. My fingers moved across the keypad as I entered a 16-character passcode. The lock released with a dry, metallic click. Inside was not the kind of laptop you could buy from any electronics store. It was a military-grade encrypted terminal. I placed my thumb on the biometric scanner. The screen flared to life, casting a cold blue glow across my face. Now let me explain something about that power of attorney I signed the night before. Jason and Maya believed they had cornered me. They thought that legal document was their golden ticket to the $4 million fortune they assumed I personally controlled. But there is a basic principle in finance that my son conveniently forgot. A power of attorney only has authority over assets legally held in the personal name of the one granting it. And the truth is, Evelyn Sterling personally owns almost nothing of significant value. 10 years earlier, right after my husband died, I had already anticipated the dangers of growing old. I had watched too many friends get stripped clean by their own children, so I quietly transferred the deed to my Westchester home, along with the bulk of my investment portfolio and liquid assets, into an irrevocable trust. Under American law, an irrevocable trust is a fortress. Legally speaking, I do not own that house. The trust does. I am merely its beneficiary and its hidden controller. That power of attorney Jason forced me to sign last night gave him control over only one thing of any relevance: my personal checking account, a minor account containing exactly $412. He had spent thousands on lawyers just to steal a coin purse. But here is where my plan became truly beautiful and truly merciless. By bringing that power of attorney to the bank, by submitting fraudulent medical declarations claiming I was suffering from cognitive decline and no longer competent to manage my own affairs, and by trying to use those lies to secure commercial financing for his startup, Jason crossed a line he could never uncross. This was no longer about a greedy son trying to rob his mother. Knowingly deceiving a federally insured financial institution in order to obtain a multi-million-dollar loan is not family betrayal. It is a federal crime. He had just committed bank fraud. He had just committed wire fraud. And he had done it all voluntarily, leaving a perfect trail of evidence across the national financial system. My fingers began moving quickly over the keyboard. I signed into my private security dashboard. Through secure portals established years ago by my legal team, I could monitor every major credit inquiry connected to my identity. A red alert was already flashing on the screen. Chase Bank. Jason had just initiated a $3 million commercial loan application. He had listed the Westchester property as collateral. He was moving fast. Desperation always makes people sloppy and stupid. What he did not know was that the moment that application ran through a proper title verification, it would fail instantly. The property was owned by the trust, not by me personally. And worse than the rejection itself, the system would automatically trigger a fraud report for investigation. Then I accessed the internal financial records of his tech startup. Numbers never lie. The company's burn rate was catastrophic. Cash was bleeding out by the day. Angel investors were already beginning to retreat after realizing that Jason's so-called product was little more than an empty shell. At the same time, I reviewed Maya's credit card history through an old family account I had never fully relinquished oversight of. In just 2 months, that shameless woman had spent more than $40,000 on designer furniture and luxury vacations in Europe. They were broke, completely broke. They were living inside a fantasy of endless wealth. And now they were trying to use my retirement as a patch on a sinking ship. They thought they had already buried me. They thought throwing me $100 a week would make me panic surrender and obey in silence. What they had actually done was place the perfect weapon directly into my hands, a weapon that would allow me to destroy them legally, financially, permanently. I did not need to scream. I did not need to lose control. I did not need to fight Maya over a shattered crystal clock. All I had to do was sit still and watch them joyfully dig their own grave, a grave so deep they would never climb back out. Pride always destroys itself. I closed the laptop. The snap of the screen echoed sharply through the quiet car. The morning sun had climbed higher now, warming the hood of my old Buick. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine came alive with a deep, steady growl, and then I smiled, a cold, satisfied smile. I was not driving home to pack for Silver Pines. I was driving toward a financial war I had been preparing for years, and I knew with absolute certainty that I already held the winning hand. I drove back home. From the outside, my red brick Colonial still carried the same quiet dignity it always had. But the moment I stepped through the front door, the phone inside my handbag began vibrating so violently it felt like an alarm going off. It wasn't 1 or 2 messages. It was a flood, a relentless, urgent barrage. I set my keys down on the small table in the foyer and pulled out my phone. My lock screen was buried under dozens of new notifications, not from close friends, not from former colleagues, from relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. The first message was from one of Jason's aunts. Evelyn, I cannot believe you would treat your children this way. They're trying to help you. The next came from a cousin. Aunt Evelyn, you need medical treatment immediately. You're making those poor kids suffer. Then another from my late husband's sister. Evelyn, this is disgraceful. You've become a cruel, senile old woman. I narrowed my eyes. This sudden coordinated attack was no coincidence. They were swarming all at once like a nest that had been stirred on purpose and pointed directly at me. I unlocked my phone and opened social media. It took less than 5 seconds to find the source of the digital riot. At the very top of my feed was Maya's profile. A live stream she had just finished minutes earlier had already been saved and reposted. The view count was climbing at a terrifying speed. I tapped the video. My daughter-in-law's face filled the screen. She was sitting in the middle of the same dusty study her contractors had vandalized that morning. But the smug smile was gone. The arrogance had vanished. In its place was a pitiful, exhausted version of Maya. She wore no makeup, or rather, makeup carefully designed to look like none at all. There were soft, dark circles painted beneath her eyes. Her hair was loose and disheveled, and she was crying. "Hi, everyone." Maya sniffled into the camera, her voice trembling with rehearsed heartbreak. My daughter-in-law truly was a gifted actress. I didn't want to bring private family matters online, but I've honestly reached my limit. Jason and I are going through the hardest time of our lives right now. We've been carrying the full burden of caring for my mother-in-law. Her memory loss has become extremely severe, but instead of cooperating, she's become aggressive and violent. She lifted one hand and brushed away a tear that looked almost too perfect to be real. This morning she had another episode. She smashed a crystal clock, a family keepsake, and threw the broken glass at me. She screamed the most horrible things you can imagine. She called me a gold digger and told me to get out of the house. Jason and I have sacrificed our money, our time, even the space we were preparing for our baby, just to keep her safe. We're working full-time while trying to watch over someone who can't control her own behavior anymore. And instead of gratitude, she treats us like the enemy. The lies kept coming, smoothly, perfectly. She played the role of the exhausted daughter-in-law with chilling skill. A young woman bravely enduring emotional abuse from a wealthy, unstable, bitter old mother-in-law. Below the video, thousands of comments were pouring in. Her followers, complete strangers, people who had never met me and never would. They called me a vicious old hag. They told Maya to have me committed. They praised Jason as a saint, a patient, loving son doing his best. Maya was using social media to put me on trial in public. She wanted me isolated from family, from reputation, from society itself. She wanted to turn me into a common enemy so that stealing from me would feel justified. She understood exactly how digital mob violence works. An elderly woman under attack from relatives and strangers alike is supposed to panic, collapse, break, surrender. I stood there in the quiet hallway listening to her false, trembling voice spill from my phone speakers. For most women my age, words like those would have been devastating. Enough to destroy a reputation, enough to send a mother into tears, into shame, into begging her children to stop. But I did not cry. I did not feel wounded. I did not feel fear. My heartbeat remained perfectly steady. I looked at the screen and began assessing the situation the way a former chief financial officer assesses legal exposure. And Maya had just handed me a gift, the kind of gift entire legal teams dream of receiving. She had publicly spread false statements with the clear intent to destroy my reputation. She had made fraudulent medical claims about me before a growing audience of thousands. She had used those lies to reinforce an active scheme to strip me of my property. In legal terms, this was not family drama. This was deliberate defamation for material gain. And the most beautiful part, she had recorded it herself, saved it herself, published it herself, on a public platform. I began taking screenshots of the comments one by one. Then I downloaded the live stream and saved it into an encrypted evidence file on my device. That foolish, greedy girl had no idea that every sentence leaving her mouth was transforming in real time into lines of monetary damages worth millions in civil court. She wanted to perform as the wounded victim. I was going to show her what it truly costs to stand in front of measured fury backed by legal judgment. Just then, another message appeared. This one from Jason. Go upstairs and start clearing out your bedroom. A bank representative will be here in an hour to assess the property. Stay out of the way and don't interfere. I don't want any incidents ruining my loan process. I smiled. The coldest smile I had worn yet. They were inviting a representative of a financial institution directly into my home. They were bringing evidence of their criminal fraud straight into my living room. Everything was arranging itself with almost divine precision. A perfect setup for a massacre with no room left for mercy. I locked my phone screen. Then I smoothed the front of my coat, making sure every line was neat and flat, and began walking up the wooden staircase with calm, steady steps. I would do exactly what my son had instructed. I would stay in my bedroom. I would not interfere. Because old wolves never make noise when they are preparing to finish their prey. They grow still. They wait. And when the perfect moment finally arrives, they sink their teeth straight into the enemy's throat. I climbed the familiar oak staircase back to my master bedroom, each step calm and steady. I was not prey retreating to its den. I was a hunter stepping back on purpose, giving the prey room to perform. I had barely pulled the bedroom door nearly shut when I heard the crunch of tires rolling over the gravel drive outside. A luxury car had just pulled up in front of the house. A second later, the front door opened. Jason's voice carried through the foyer, loud and polished, dripping with manufactured confidence. He was playing the part of the successful executive now, the devoted family man carrying the weight of a legacy on his shoulders. Another man entered with him. From the sounds drifting up from downstairs, I could hear every greeting clearly enough. The stranger introduced himself as a senior property appraiser sent by Chase Bank. He was there to evaluate the full value of the home in support of Jason's $3 million commercial loan application. I stood silently behind my bedroom door and listened. Jason began giving the appraiser a tour of the first floor. He bragged about the high ceilings, the marble fireplace, and the expensive interior upgrades I had personally chosen and paid for years ago. The lies came out of him so smoothly it was almost chilling. He told the bank representative that the house was fully under his control and that he planned to renovate the entire property into a modern live work headquarters with luxury residential space. "Excuse me for one moment," Jason said from the foot of the stairs. "I need to go upstairs and check on my mother. She's elderly, and her mental state isn't very stable. I've had to activate medical protective authority for her care. I hope you'll understand if there's any inconvenience." Then I heard his footsteps pounding quickly up the staircase. The mask of the polished gentleman fell away the moment he reached my door. He shoved it open and stepped into the room, his face tight, his eyes hard with threat. He stared at me. I was standing by the window, arms relaxed at my sides, completely at ease. "Listen to me carefully, Mom," Jason hissed through clenched teeth, keeping his voice just low enough so the man downstairs wouldn't hear, but sharp enough to cut. "The bank's representative is downstairs. He's going to measure every room and photograph the whole house. My $3 million loan depends entirely on this appraisal. You are not to leave this room. You are not to make a sound. You are not to speak to him." I looked directly into his eyes. "And what if I want to go downstairs and get a glass of water, Jason?" "You don't need water right now," he snapped. "Sit down in that chair and act like a confused old woman who needs to rest. If you walk out of this room and say anything stupid that ruins this appraisal, I swear to God I'll call psychiatric transport myself. I already have the power of attorney and the medical paperwork. I can have you admitted to a locked memory care unit by this afternoon. Don't test my patience." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned, walked out, and slammed the door behind him. Then came the metallic click. Cold. Final. He had just used a spare key to lock my bedroom door from the outside. I stood still for a few seconds. My own son had confined me inside my own house. To him, I was nothing more than an old dog that needed to be locked away while guests were visiting. Most mothers in that moment would have felt their hearts split open. They would have pounded on the door. They would have cried, screamed, begged to be let out. They would have drowned in humiliation and heartbreak in the unbearable agony of being stripped of their most basic freedom by their own child. But I did not move. I did not touch the door. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I walked calmly to the old leather armchair in the corner of the room and sat down. Then I closed my eyes, not to mourn my fate, to sharpen my focus on everything happening below. My silence was not surrender. It was calculation. The calculation of a former chief financial officer listening to a textbook fraud unfold in real time. I could hear the footsteps of the two men moving through the first floor. I heard the tape measure snapping in and out. I heard the camera shutter clicking again and again. The appraiser was doing his job carefully. He was photographing the hardwood floors, the custom window frames, every angle of the house, documenting everything needed to justify the highest possible valuation. Jason thought locking me away was clever. He thought that if I stayed out of sight, the bank would smoothly release $3 million based on the power of attorney he held in his hand. He was too arrogant, too delusional to understand the first rules of financial law. In my mind, I began walking through the loan process step by step. The appraiser would finish his report. That report would be forwarded to Chase's Risk and Underwriting Division. The file would include the photographs taken today, along with the ownership declaration Jason had signed himself. He had used his authority as my so-called legal representative to certify that this property belonged personally to Evelyn Sterling and that there were no competing legal restrictions on it. And that was the fatal weakness, because Jason had no idea that any commercial loan above $1 million requires deep title verification. The moment the bank's legal team entered this property's address into the federal record system, they would not find my name listed as the current owner. They would find another name, the Sterling Family Trust, an irrevocable trust, the The power of attorney Jason was relying on had absolutely no legal authority over trust-owned property. Put simply, he was attempting to use a house as collateral that did not belong to him, and did not even belong to me personally. Inviting the appraiser inside, presenting himself as the party with full authority over the home, signing the commercial loan documents, every one of those actions moved him further into unmistakable criminal territory. Each camera click downstairs sounded like another nail being hammered into his coffin. Each measurement the appraiser recorded became another line of evidence that would be impossible to explain away in federal court. If I had pounded on the door and ruined the appraisal, Jason might have been embarrassed. The bank might have canceled the loan. He might have had a chance to retreat. But by sitting silently inside this locked room, I was allowing him to complete every last step necessary to incriminate himself beyond escape. I was letting him walk all the way into a steel trap that would never open again. I opened my eyes and looked around my quiet bedroom. I ran my fingertips over the soft leather of the chair. Afternoon sunlight was beginning to stretch across the window, laying long golden bars across one side of the room. I did not feel like a prisoner. I felt like a general in a command tent, calmly watching the enemy march its own army into a minefield. Time moved slowly. Nearly an hour and a half passed before I finally heard footsteps heading toward the front door. Then came the polite goodbyes, the thanks, the closing of the main door. A moment later, the appraiser's engine started and faded away. The appraisal was complete. The bank had everything it needed. The gun was loaded, and Jason had just pulled the trigger himself. Then his footsteps sounded on the stairs again. The key turned in the lock. The bedroom door swung open. Jason stood there, suit jacket unbuttoned, sweat shining faintly on his forehead, but the smile on his face was bright with triumph. He looked at me sitting obediently in the chair and gave a satisfied nod. "See, Mom. That wasn't so hard," he said in a tone so patronizing it almost sounded charitable. He valued the house very highly. "Once the funds clear next week, I'll make sure your care facility gets 6 months paid in advance. You did very well staying quiet." I looked at him, my face giving him nothing. "Thank you, Jason," I said evenly. "I've always known how to stay silent at the most important moments." He gave a smug little smile and turned to walk away. He didn't even bother locking the door this time. He thought I was finally broken, finally obedient, finally defeated. He would never understand that my silence today was the most brutal sentence he had ever received. I waited until the appraiser's engine had faded into the distance before walking over to the small table by the window. Jason had locked the bedroom door from the outside, but he had forgotten one very basic fact. This room had once been my command center during my years as chief financial officer. It contained everything I needed. Calmly, I switched on the electric kettle. The soft hiss of heating water broke the silence. I poured myself a cup of Earl Grey rich with the sharp scent of bergamot. No rushing, no panic. I took one slow sip and felt clarity move through me like a current. Then I picked up my secure phone. It was time to let the legal monsters out of their cages. My first call was to Lawrence. He had managed the Sterling Family Trust for the last 10 years, and he answered on the second ring. "Evelyn, what's urgent enough for you to use the secure line?" His voice was warm, steady, professional. "Lawrence Jason just brought a Chase Bank appraiser into the house," I said, pronouncing each word with perfect precision. "He's using that financial power of attorney to file for a $3 million commercial loan. He told the bank he is my legal representative and that I am the sole owner of this house." I heard Lawrence laugh under his breath. A dry lawyer's laugh. "How stupid," he said. "Evelyn, you know as well as I do that the house stopped belonging to you 10 years ago. It belongs to the irrevocable trust. That power of attorney means nothing. His loan will be denied the moment the bank checks federal title records." I know I said, my eyes fixed on the wide lawn beyond the window. "But I'm not calling to stop the loan. I'm calling so you can prepare the next move. The second the denial notice comes through, I want you to draft a formal eviction order. Jason and Maya are living in trust property without legal standing. Give them exactly 30 days to remove every last thing they own. No negotiation. Understood?" Lawrence said. "I'll prepare the paperwork immediately." I ended the call. The second one took a little longer. I dialed a long number I had never stored in my contacts. It was the direct line for Agent Harris in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Years earlier, when I was still a CFO, we had worked together to expose a money laundering operation that had tried to move through my former company. Harris speaking. His voice was clipped and decisive. "Agent Harris, this is Evelyn Sterling. I need to report an active case of federal bank fraud." I spoke in the tone of a woman reading out a balance sheet. "The subject is Jason Sterling, address in Westchester. He has just submitted a $3 million commercial loan application to Chase Bank." I paused long enough for Harris to enter the information into his system. Then I continued. "He used fraudulent legal documents to establish ownership of collateral. More serious than that, he submitted false medical declarations stating that I am mentally incompetent in order to freeze my bank accounts and seize my personal assets. That conduct constitutes wire fraud and financial fraud. All supporting evidence is already logged within Chase's internal systems and the National Credit Reporting Network." There was a beat of silence. "Evelyn, are you reporting your own son?" Harris asked. There was surprise in his voice, but not enough to disturb his professionalism. "I am reporting a financial criminal," I said coldly. "His conduct puts the banking system at risk and violates my legal rights in the most serious way possible. I want the FBI to open a formal investigation. Start with his Chase loan file. We'll review it immediately," Harris said. "Thank you for bringing this forward." Then the line went dead. 2 blades had already been released. Only one strike remained. The final strike. The one that would strip my arrogant son of every ounce of false power and borrowed pride. I took another sip of tea. It had cooled slightly, but the bitterness still lingered on my tongue. Then I called Thomas, the chairman of the board at the startup where Jason served as chief executive. "Evelyn, what an honor to hear from you," Thomas said warmly. "I hope everything is all right." "It is not, Thomas," I said. "As you know, through Apex Ventures, I hold 51% of your company's equity. I am the controlling shareholder, and I have just uncovered something unacceptable about your current CEO." A pause. "What happened?" Thomas asked, his voice tightening. "Jason Sterling has just committed federal bank fraud," I said bluntly. "He falsified documents to try to pledge property he does not own in order to inject capital into the company. The matter has already been reported to the FBI. If this becomes public, the reputation of your entire board and your company will be destroyed." "My God," Thomas whispered. "What do we do?" "I want an emergency shareholder meeting called for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning," I said. "Do not tell Jason the purpose. Let him believe it's a celebratory meeting about his new financing. I will be there in person. We will hold an immediate vote to remove him as CEO and freeze every corporate credit card currently being used by him and his wife." "I understand," Thomas said quickly. "It will be arranged exactly as you requested." I set the phone back down on the table. My Earl Grey was finished. 3 calls. Less than 15 minutes. And I had just destroyed everything Jason and Maya were trying to build on top of my suffering. They thought I was sitting in this locked bedroom, trembling, crying, collapsing under despair. They had no idea this locked room had become an execution chamber. And I had just signed the death warrant for their future with my own hand. I drew in one slow, steady breath and felt power surge through my veins. Everything was ready for tomorrow, the day I would step out of the shadows and take back my kingdom. I stood in the bedroom and listened until the bank representative's car disappeared completely beyond the bend in the gravel drive. The house returned to its usual silence, but it was no longer the silence of a safe refuge. It was the silence of a battlefield after the pieces had all been set in place. I rose from the leather armchair. The waiting was over. I crossed the room to the massive oak wardrobe that covered an entire wall and pulled the doors open. My retirement clothes, the soft knit sweaters, the silk dresses, the quiet things I had worn for years, were pushed aside. Buried deeper inside were the clothes from another life, a life Jason had forgotten, or perhaps chosen to ignore. I slipped out of the fragile wool robe I had been wearing and reached for a navy suit custom-tailored to perfection. It was the same suit I had worn the day I closed a $200 million merger 15 years earlier. Every line of it radiated authority, precision, absolute confidence. I slid the jacket onto my shoulders. The feel of silk blend fabric against my skin was like putting on armor. Then I stepped into a pair of black heels, not too high, but sharp enough to strike the hardwood floor with clean, decisive authority. Finally, I took my classic black leather handbag and placed my phone and encrypted laptop inside. Then I walked to the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me was no longer a 62-year-old mother dismissed by her own children. She was Evelyn Sterling, former chief financial officer. Her eyes were calm cold and fully awake. No tears were permitted. No panic was allowed to exist. Then I heard it. Heavy footsteps on the staircase. Jason was coming up. Behind him came the sharp clicking of Maya's heels. They were approaching together, coming to inspect the results of what they believed was their victory. They expected to find me broken, crying, begging. The key turned in the lock from the outside. The handle twisted. Jason shoved the bedroom door open with all the smug arrogance of a man arriving to announce his triumph. His smile spread wide before he even finished the sentence. "It's done, Mom." The bank completed the appraisal, and his voice died in his throat. The smile on his face froze, then shattered. Maya stopped dead just behind him, her eyes widening in disbelief. They had prepared themselves to deal with a confused old woman, a weak mother, a crumbling victim. They expected to find me curled up on the bed or trembling in some corner of the room. Instead, standing in the center of that bedroom waiting for them was a woman who looked like she belonged in command of nations. The sharp suit, the heels, the leather bag in my hand. My presence hit them with such force that neither of them could speak. Jason blinked over and over as if his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Then, instinctively, he took half a step back. Mom, what are you wearing? Where are you going?" He stammered, every trace of his earlier confidence suddenly gone. I did not answer right away. I walked toward the door slowly. Each click of my heels against the wooden floor landed with perfect clarity. I stopped directly in front of Jason and Maya. Only one step separated us. I was shorter than my son, and yet in that moment, I was looking down at him. My gaze swept over Jason's stunned expression, then moved to Maya's face, now visibly pale. I was not angry. I looked at them with the coldest kind of pity possible, the kind reserved for fools who have just signed their own death warrants without realizing it. "I have a few matters to attend to, Jason," I said, my voice low and smooth, carrying the weight of an iceberg beneath still water, the kind of matters you are not remotely qualified to understand. Jason tried to recover himself. He swallowed hard and lifted his chin, trying to force authority back into his posture. "You can't go anywhere. Your accounts are frozen and you don't have the right. I didn't let him finish." I walked straight past him. Maya's cheap perfume rose into the air as I brushed by, but I ignored it. When I reached the doorway, I paused and turned my head just slightly. My eyes swept across the bedroom once more, then settled on the utterly confused face of the son I had once raised. "Enjoy the house, Jason." I said each word crisp and sharp as glass. "Enjoy it while you still can." I did not wait to see their reaction. I walked down the stairs. The sound of my heels echoed through the downstairs hallway like a victory march. Then I opened the front door and stepped out into the afternoon light. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, leaving the two of them standing frozen in that hollow room. They still didn't understand, but from the moment that door closed, the countdown to their destruction had officially begun. At 9 o'clock the next morning, I pulled my car up in front of a luxury glass office tower in the heart of the business district. The morning air was cool and clean. But inside my phone, the atmosphere was boiling with a level of delusion so absurd it was almost laughable. I sat in the car, took a slow sip of black coffee with no sugar, and calmly opened my social media app. Just as I had expected, my shameless daughter-in-law could never resist an opportunity to show off. Maya was live. Her video had already pulled in thousands of viewers, the number climbing higher every second. Behind her was the entire top-floor office of Jason's startup inside this very glass tower. The space looked exactly like the kind of place reckless tech boys build when they want to look successful before they've earned a single real dollar. I could see foosball tables, oversized designer bean bags, and a sleek espresso bar staffed by a professional barista. All of that flashy nonsense had been built with the sweat-soaked money I had poured into that hollow company. And right now, in the middle of that office, they were throwing a lavish celebration. Gold balloons shimmered against the ceiling. Electronic music pulsed through the room. Laughter and chatter rose in noisy waves. Maya floated through the office like a queen inspecting her kingdom. She wore a brand-new designer silk dress, held a glass of champagne in one hand and her phone in the other, posing endlessly as she walked. "Good morning, my beautiful followers," Maya sang out in a bright, triumphant voice. "Today is such a huge day. I'm here at Jason's company headquarters. Do you guys see this energy? We're having a little celebration because my husband just closed an absolutely massive $3 million deal. His company is about to rise to the next level. And honestly, let's be real. My husband is basically on his way to becoming a billionaire." Then she let out a high theatrical laugh and spun the camera around to show off the fake wealth surrounding her. "Yesterday, so many of you messaged me asking about the family situation. I just want to say this hard decisions always bring the greatest rewards. Moving my mother-in-law into a professional care environment was a necessary step so our family could finally move forward. The family assets are finally in the hands of people who actually know how to make them grow. You see, people who are stubborn and out of touch only know how to cling to old bricks and dead property. But visionaries like my husband, they know how to turn it into an empire." I let out a cold little smile. Maya's stupidity had truly become an art form. She was standing in front of thousands of people on the internet, openly admitting to the seizure of an elderly woman's assets for personal enrichment. Every sentence leaving her mouth was being preserved by my legal team as another line of evidence no court would ever ignore. The camera turned then toward the center of the party. Jason was standing there, surrounded by employees and a few board members. He wore a custom suit worth thousands of dollars, his hair slicked back to perfection. He raised a champagne glass into the air and called for silence so he could speak. Maya moved closer to capture every word. "Thank you all for being here today," Jason began in a warm, self-satisfied tone. "The last few months have been challenging for this company. A lot of people doubted us. Some of our angel investors hesitated. But great leaders do not retreat from pressure. They find solutions. And today I'm proud to announce that I have solved our cash flow problem." Applause broke out instantly from employees who had no idea they were cheering for a fraud. Jason smiled and soaked it in. Then he continued, "I made the decision to leverage the full core assets of my family in order to secure our financial future. It required enormous sacrifice, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes for the future of this team. The bank has completed the appraisal, and the $3 million capital injection will be entering the system very soon. We are going to scale. We are going to crush our competitors. So raise your glass to the greatness waiting ahead of us." Glass struck glass all around the room. People chanted Jason's name. Maya turned the camera back toward herself, smiling like she had just won an Oscar. "See how amazing my husband is," she said. "Tonight we're flying to Europe to reward ourselves with a luxury getaway. I'll see you all in my next luxury shopping videos." And then the live stream ended. My phone screen went dark. Their delusion had reached its highest point. They were literally raising glasses to celebrate a federal criminal case. They were spending money borrowed through fraud and drinking down poison they had poured for themselves with their own hands. I slipped the phone back into my black leather handbag. Then I opened the car door and stepped out onto the street. Morning sunlight flashed across my navy suit. The wind caught the edge of my jacket as I walked toward the revolving doors with long, decisive strides. The lobby security guard dipped his head as I passed. I did not need to ask for a visitor badge. I walked straight to the executive elevator and swiped the private access card I had kept in my possession for years. The doors closed. The elevator shot upward toward the top floor. They had already been given enough time to perform their little pageant of victory. The celebration was over. Now it was time for the old wolf to walk through the door and rip every foolish illusion to pieces. I stood there watching the floor numbers rise one by one. Each passing floor was another step in the countdown to the total collapse of the paper empire Jason was clinging to. And in just a few more seconds, their world would never be the same again. The elevator stopped at the top floor. The metal doors opened with a smooth, almost silent glide. I stepped out into the thickly carpeted corridor reserved for senior leadership. At the far end stood a pair of solid oak doors leading into the boardroom. Through the frosted glass, I could make out the silhouettes of people seated around a long table. Jason's voice carried steadily through the internal speaker system. He was in the middle of one of his endless speeches, rambling on about imaginary financial projections and expansion plans built on the $3 million he thought he had stolen from me. I shoved both oak doors open. The hinges let out one dry, echoing groan that cut across the entire room. Every head turned. All whispered conversations died instantly. The boardroom, with its sweeping panoramic view of the city's skyline, fell into a dead, suffocating silence. 20 executives and board members sat around an oval marble table. They wore expensive suits and luxury watches. At the head of the table stood Jason, laser pointer in hand, facing a presentation screen. The moment he saw me, the smug smile on his face froze. His expression shifted from shock to panic, then finally into raw, blazing fury. He could not believe that the 62-year-old mother he had locked in a bedroom the day before was now standing in the center of his kingdom. I was not wearing a shapeless sweater or some faded house dress. I was wearing my sharpest navy suit, my black heels, my black leather bag. I walked into that room with the presence of a woman who had spent an entire lifetime mastering spaces exactly like this one. The sound of my heels striking the polished stone floor came steady and precise, each step carrying its own authority. "What the hell are you doing here, Mom?" Jason roared, shattering the silence. His voice cracked under the strain of losing control. Then he spun toward the trembling assistant standing near the wall. "Call security right now. Get her out of here. My mother is having a serious mental episode, and she's clearly agitated." Several board members began murmuring under their breath. They looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Jason had already fed them his story about a confused elderly mother who needed to be placed in assisted care. But the woman standing before them now did not look confused. She did not look unstable. I stood tall, chin slightly lifted, my entire bearing, calm, composed, and unmistakably commanding. "I would strongly advise against calling security," I said. My voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. A woman who had spent 15 years as a chief financial officer always knows how to use her voice to control a room. Calling security to remove a shareholder from a board meeting would be a serious violation of company policy. Jason stared at me, the veins in his forehead pulsing. "What nonsense are you talking about?" he shouted, stepping toward me with open aggression. "You don't own a single share in this company. This is my company. I am the CEO. You are disrupting an important board meeting. If you don't walk out of here right now, I'll drag you out myself." I didn't take a single step back. I looked straight into his bloodshot, furious eyes. "You're welcome to try Jason," I said calmly. "But before you lay a hand on me, you should remember that every person in this room is watching, and you are standing on very thin ice." Jason turned sharply toward Thomas, the chairman of the board, who was seated in silence at the center of the table. "Thomas, for God's sake, call security," Jason barked, half pleading, half commanding. "You can see it yourself. She's completely senile. She ran away from home, and now she's delusional. We cannot let her ruin this celebration. The $3 million loan is about to be funded, and we have far too much to do." But Thomas did not reach for his phone. He did not call security. Instead, the powerful chairman slowly rose to his feet. He buttoned his suit jacket, adjusted his tie, and looked at Jason with an expression that had changed completely. There was no admiration in it, no support, only pity. Jason Thomas said quietly, "You need to calm down. She's right. We cannot have security remove her." "Why not?" Jason exploded, clutching his head as if the world itself were beginning to crack apart. "She is nobody in this company. She's just my mother, an old woman who needs psychiatric treatment." I took 2 more steps forward until I stood beside the marble table. Then I placed my leather bag down on its surface. The sound was small, but it landed with the weight of a verdict. I swept my gaze across every face in the room. A few of them, the older directors, the veterans, had already begun to recognize me. They recognized the woman who had once been something of a legend in the world of finance and logistics. One by one, their posture changed. They sat up straighter. Any trace of smug amusement vanished. "I am not a senile old woman who wandered into the wrong room, Jason," I said coldly, each word crisp and deliberate, as if I were delivering a sentence. "I have never had memory loss. I have never lost legal capacity. I only pretended to be weak so I could see how far you were willing to sink into greed and cruelty. And you did not disappoint me. You proved that you would gladly trample the woman who gave you life in exchange for a cheap illusion of power." Jason's mouth fell open. The polished confidence of a successful CEO had been stripped away, leaving behind only the panic of a child caught stealing. He turned toward the board, desperately searching for an ally. "Don't listen to her," he stammered. "She's delusional. The $3 million loan is real. I have power of attorney. I have collateral. Everything is legal. Your stupidity has always been the most astonishing thing about you, Jason," I said softly, cutting straight through his pathetic defense. "I gave you time. I gave you opportunity. And you chose to destroy yourself instead. Did you really think you could manipulate a board of directors with lies? Did you really think you could outsmart the federal banking system with a worthless power of attorney?" The room went completely still. No one dared breathe too loudly. The tension was almost unbearable. What they were witnessing was not a family argument. It was a coup. And my arrival was not simply the arrival of a mother demanding justice. It was the return of a queen reclaiming a stolen kingdom, and this queen had not come carrying forgiveness. She had come carrying punishment. Thomas turned toward me and gave a slight respectful bow of his head. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, "everyone is present just as you requested. We are awaiting your next instruction." I gave him a small nod in return. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick file stamped with red seals. I dropped it onto the center of the marble table. "Good," I said. "Then let us begin the real meeting." I let my eyes settle on Jason. "And the first item on today's agenda is the immediate termination of Chief Executive Officer Jason Sterling." Jason's legs nearly gave out beneath him. He stumbled backward until his body struck the glass presentation wall behind him. His performance was over, and the curtain was finally beginning to fall on the traitor who thought he could steal a throne. I stood at the very center of the room. The silence was so complete you could hear the ventilation system pushing out streams of cold air. Thomas, the man everyone considered the most powerful figure on Jason's board, slowly rose from the chairman's seat. He did not look at Jason. He walked straight toward me and gave a slight bow of his head. It was the kind of gesture reserved only for people who held the financial fate of others in their hands. Jason stared at Thomas, then looked back at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He had no idea what was happening. He looked like a bad actor who had suddenly been thrown out of the script he had memorized. I lifted the file from the table and slammed it down onto the marble surface. The impact cracked through the room sharp and merciless. The stack of documents slid across the table and came to a stop directly in front of Jason. On the cover, printed in bold legal lettering, were the words, "The Sterling Family Trust." The font was cold, lifeless, and formal, but the power behind it was devastating. "Open it, Jason," I said. My voice carried no anger, only the chill of a sentence that had already been decided. "Show your board what your $3 million collateral really is." Jason's hands trembled as he touched the file. He opened the first page. His eyes skimmed the legal language, and within seconds the arrogance drained from his face so completely it was as if every drop of blood had left his body. He took a step backward and began muttering nonsense under his breath. "That's impossible. My power of attorney was notarized. I'm her legal representative." I stepped closer. It was time to end his little lesson in financial law. "That power of attorney is completely valid, Jason. I said slowly, making sure every word sank like a nail into his mind and into the minds of everyone in that room. You really did force me to sign a full financial power of attorney. But there is one basic principle your incompetent lawyer forgot to explain to you. A power of attorney applies only to assets held in the personal name of the person granting it. I let my gaze sweep across the board. They were holding their breath. 10 years ago, I continued after your father died. I realized something. I realized that greed can turn children into monsters. So I transferred ownership of the Westchester house, along with the family's core assets, into an irrevocable trust. Then I repeated it for him clearly. An irrevocable trust. Jason's mouth fell open as he struggled to breathe. He raised a hand to his forehead. "The trust," he whispered. "Yes," I said calmly. "Legally, Evelyn Sterling does not own that house. The trust does. I am only the beneficiary and the hidden trustee. That power of attorney you marched into the bank with yesterday, the same document you used to threaten me and lock me in my own bedroom, gave you control over only one thing: my personal checking account. An account I intentionally left with $400 in it. You built a perfect plan to strip me of power. And all you managed to steal was a coin purse." I kept my eyes fixed on Jason's collapsing face. "You underestimated the woman who raised you. Did you really think that after 30 years in finance, I would leave everything I built under a single personal name, waiting to be seized? I have watched entire families destroy themselves over power of attorney documents just like this one. I have seen elderly people pushed out of their own homes because they trusted empty, greedy children exactly like you. That is why the trust exists. It is a fortress. And you, my son, you just showed up to a stone citadel carrying a wooden sword." Thomas folded his hands together and looked at Jason with open contempt. So he said dryly, "Our brilliant CEO, our savior, just tried to pledge collateral that doesn't even belong to him. You promised this board a $3 million lifeline based on paperwork that means absolutely nothing." Jason spun toward Thomas in panic. "That's not what happened. I can explain. The bank came to appraise the property. They approved it. The bank came to take photographs, Jason." I cut in coldly. "Every commercial loan goes through title verification. At this very moment, Chase has already received the federal ownership report. They know the property belongs to the trust, not to you. That $3 million loan you were celebrating, it will never be funded, not 1 cent. You lied to this entire board and built their hopes on a fantasy of your own making." The murmuring in the room erupted instantly. The same directors who had applauded Jason now looked at him with fury and disgust. They understood what he really was. Not a savior, not a visionary, just a greedy amateur so blinded by ambition that he had dragged all of them toward legal disaster. One of the senior directors at the far end of the table finally spoke his anger impossible to contain. "Jason, you signed representations to this board that the collateral was legitimate and unencumbered. You used false information to keep us operating under false confidence. This is not just deception. This is a serious ethical breach." Jason made one final attempt to cling to hope. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading now. "Mom, please don't do this. I was just trying to save our company. You can have the trust guarantee the loan. Just one signature from you and everything can still be fixed." I laughed, a sharp, icy laugh that cut straight through the tension in the room. "You still don't understand the situation, do you, Jason?" I said. "I did not come here to save you. I came here to make you understand what happens when you threaten to lock your own mother in a nursing home and destroy the last keepsakes of your father. That power of attorney you forced me to sign became a perfect weapon, but the blade is pointed at your throat, not mine." I lowered my voice, and somehow the force of it only grew. "You thought you had won when you locked me in that bedroom yesterday. You thought freezing my bank cards would make me beg. But in the world of real financial operators, we do not use shouting threats or tantrums. We use documents, evidence, terms that cannot be argued away. You built a trap out of rope. I crushed it with a wall of steel." Jason sank into the leather chair behind him. The laser pointer slipped from his hand, hit the marble floor, and rolled uselessly into a corner. He was no longer a powerful chief executive. He was just a fraud exposed in front of a room full of witnesses. The power of attorney he had treated like a magic shield had become evidence against him. And this reversal needed no tears, no screaming, no dramatic breakdown. It required only the dead calm of a mother who understood the cruelty of money far better than her son ever would. And in that moment, any chance my son had of escaping what he had done was gone forever. Bottom of form. I stood motionless in the center of the boardroom, my gaze sweeping across each face stretched tight with fear. No one dared to speak. The air had turned so heavy, so suffocating, it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Jason sat collapsed in his chair, his eyes wide and empty, staring into nothing. He was still trying to process the truth, that his precious power of attorney was worthless. But the worst part had not even begun. I had not come here merely to destroy a loan. I had come to finish a traitor. I tapped my index finger lightly against the marble tabletop. The dry, sharp sound snapped every wandering mind back to me. "Jason," I said, my voice even slow and unbearably heavy, "do you really think the denial of your loan is the worst thing that's going to happen to you? Do you think this is just a failed fundraising attempt, and that we can all simply go home as if none of this ever happened?" I let the silence deepen before I answered my own question. No, Jason. In the world of finance, once you cross a certain line, there is no turning back. I opened the file to the third page and pointed to the bold legal language. When you submitted that $3 million commercial loan application into Chase Bank's system, you were required to check a certification box. That certification required you to affirm under penalty of perjury that you had lawful ownership rights over the collateral you were offering. You electronically signed that statement yourself. You uploaded the power of attorney. You uploaded the old copy of the deed you stole from my safe. Jason's breathing turned ragged. Cold sweat began to gather on his forehead. He reached up and loosened the expensive silk tie around his neck, as though something invisible were choking him. "Do you know what that is called under federal law?" I asked. I did not wait for him to answer. Under Title 18 of the United States Code Section 1344, knowingly providing false information in order to defraud a federally insured financial institution for the purpose of obtaining money or property is officially defined as bank fraud. The maximum penalty for that crime is 30 years in federal prison and a $1 million fine. You did not just lie to me. You did not just lie to this board. You lied to the federal government. The murmuring exploded again around the room, but this time it was not curiosity. It was panic. Board members began whispering urgently to one another. A few grabbed their phones, no doubt texting their personal attorneys. No one wanted to be dragged into a criminal investigation. Thomas, the chairman, had gone pale. He rubbed his temple as if trying to keep his composure in the middle of the wreckage his CEO had just created. "But that still isn't all, Jason." I continued, my voice as cold and precise as a scalpel. "Because you submitted that application through the bank's online portal, your false information was transmitted through interstate servers across the country. That triggers a second serious offense, wire fraud. And then, of course, there is the fraudulent medical declaration you submitted to freeze my accounts. You bribed or manipulated a doctor into giving you a document claiming I was suffering from cognitive decline. You used it to strip me of my most basic human rights in order to seize my assets." I stepped closer to him. Now only an arm's length separated me from the traitor. He shrank into the chair, his eyes darting wildly around the room, searching for an escape that did not exist. "You did all of this just to build an illusion of power," I said. "You thought expensive suits and a luxury office could turn you into a great man, but you are nothing more than a greedy child playing with laws you do not understand." Jason swallowed hard. When he spoke, his voice was broken, shaking almost unrecognizable. "Mom, you can't do this. You're not going to hand over your own son to the police. I'm your blood. Please, please withdraw the evidence." Blood. I let out a short, bitter laugh. That concept died the moment you and your wife sat at my dining table and planned to lock me in a nursing home so you could steal my house. It died the moment you locked me in my bedroom and cut off every financial resource I had, hoping I would either starve or surrender in fear. I am not handing you over to the authorities, Jason. I am simply refusing to cover up the crimes you committed. At this very moment, Agent Harris of the FBI has already received the full report. They are collecting evidence from Chase Bank's servers as we speak. Jason nearly came apart right there. His face turned the color of ash. His hands trembled violently as they gripped the leather arms of the chair until his knuckles went white. He knew I never made empty threats. For 30 years I had kept every promise I ever made, and when I passed judgment, I carried it out with absolute precision. He looked around the room for help, at the very same board members who had been raising glasses in his honor just minutes earlier, but every one of them turned away. They avoided his eyes as if he were contagious. Then Thomas slammed his hand down on the table. "Enough," he said, his voice hard with anger and finality. "Jason Sterling, you have placed this entire company under catastrophic legal risk. Your arrogance and deception have gone far beyond anything this board can tolerate. I will not wait for federal agents to walk into this office before taking the steps necessary to protect this company." I took one step back and gave Thomas the stage. He turned his sharp gaze on Jason and spoke in a voice that rang through the room. "As chairman, I move for an immediate vote. Jason Sterling is to be removed from all duties as chief executive officer effective immediately. His access to all internal systems is to be suspended. All corporate credit cards used by him and his wife are to be frozen at once. His office is to be sealed for an independent investigation. All in favor, raise your hand." Not a single second of hesitation. 20 hands rose at once. The motion passed unanimously. Not one abstention. The king without a throne had been overthrown inside the very empire of delusion he had built for himself. Jason sat there, hollow, pathetic, drenched in cold sweat, his collar soaked through. He had lost everything in an instant. No $3 million loan, no Westchester house, no powerful CEO title. And soon enough, iron bars and federal prison doors would close around what was left of his freedom. My cruelty was not a loud outburst of rage. It was a federal sentence delivered with deadly calm. Jason slammed both hands down on the marble table. The sharp crack echoed through the room, but it could not hide the panic already eating him alive from the inside out. He refused to accept defeat. He ripped the expensive silk tie from his neck, yanked open the buttons of his suit jacket, and roared like an animal finally cornered. "So what, if the house is in a trust?" he shouted, spittle flying from the corners of his mouth. "She can keep that pile of old bricks. I don't need that $3 million loan anymore. I'll raise money from another fund. She has no authority here. I am still the CEO of this company. I am the founder. I am the visionary. I built this tech empire from nothing, and no one in this room, not even my mother, has the right to take it away from me." Then he spun toward the board members, glaring at them with bloodshot fury. "You're all going to listen to a senile old woman. Have you forgotten who made you money? Apex Ventures, our largest venture capital backer, holds 51% of this company. They support me. They believe in my vision. If you push me out, Apex will wipe all of you out. I'll call their representative right now, and every one of you is going to regret turning against me." He yanked the newest model of smartphone from his pocket. His fingers shook as he tried to dial. He was clinging now to the last life raft he believed was still floating, a raft he believed was bigger, stronger, and more powerful than anyone else in that room. I stood there with my arms folded lightly across my chest. I did not interrupt his pathetic tantrum. I let him speak. I let him spill out the full measure of his hollow arrogance, the arrogance of a man who had never truly understood how capital works. The board remained silent. They watched him with exhausted contempt. A few of them shook their heads slightly. They all understood the same thing now: a CEO who loses emotional control in public is nothing but a delayed explosion waiting to happen. As Jason lifted the phone to his ear and waited for the call to connect, I calmly opened my black leather handbag. From inside that bag, a bag now full of financial death sentences, I took out a second file. It was much thinner than the trust documents, only a simple black folder, no label, no bold title, no dramatic legal stamp, and yet what it contained was enough to crush the last fragments of my son's pride into dust. I set the folder gently on the table and slid it toward Thomas. The chairman looked at me, then slowly opened it. "You don't need to call Apex Ventures, Jason," I said. My voice was soft, but so cold the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Their servers won't transfer your call." Jason lowered the phone a few inches from his ear. His eyes were streaked red now, his chest heaving. "What trick are you trying now?" he hissed. "You know nothing about venture capital. You're just an outdated, old accountant. Apex Ventures is a stealth fund with tens of millions in capital. They're real sharks. They don't care about your cheap family drama." I smiled, the same smile I used to reserve for the dumbest men in business right before I crushed them across a negotiation table. "Sharks," I repeated, almost amused. "Thomas, would you please read aloud the name of the sole founder and chief executive officer of Apex Ventures?" "For our former CEO." Thomas turned to the final page of the file. His hand trembled slightly when he saw the signature and the legal ownership seal. Then he looked up at Jason with an expression full of mockery and pity. He cleared his throat and read every word clearly. "The sole founder, chief executive officer, and 100% owner of Apex Ventures is Mrs. Evelyn Sterling." Jason's phone slipped from his hand. It hit the marble floor and shattered the screen, exploding with a sharp crack. But that sound was nothing compared to the collapse happening inside his mind. His legs gave out completely. He staggered backward, hit the edge of the table, and slid down until both knees slammed against the floor. The boardroom erupted into shocked murmurs. Directors stared at one another, then turned to me in collective awe. They had just realized that the woman standing in front of them was not merely the mother of a fraud. She was the hidden financial force that had kept this company alive for the last 2 years. She was the one holding all of their lives in her hands. "No," Jason stammered. "No, that's impossible." Apex Ventures is a Silicon Valley fund. They invested $5 million in our first round. Their representatives were a whole legal team. You can't have that kind of money. You only had your retirement and the house. I slowly walked around the marble table and approached my son still kneeling on the floor. The sound of my heels came one slow step at a time, like a funeral bell. "You really thought your ridiculous little ideas were worth $5 million, Jason?" I said, my voice cold enough to cut straight through the center of his false ego. 2 years ago, when you were crawling from investor to investor begging for money, not a single venture fund wanted your company. Your product was broken, your vision was shallow and laughable. You were rejected by 27 different investors. Do you remember that? You cried in my living room and said the world was unfair to geniuses like you. I stopped right in front of him and looked down at the bowed head of the defeated man on the floor. I couldn't bear to watch you collapse. I wanted to give you one chance to prove yourself, but I knew that if I handed you money directly, you would treat it like the automatic duty of a mother. So I instructed my lawyers to build a shell company in Silicon Valley. I transferred a small portion of my private portfolio into it and named it Apex Ventures. Every lawyer who represented Apex, every email you received, every funding decision you bragged about for the last 2 years, all of it came from the laptop sitting in my bedroom. Jason grabbed his head with both hands, his fingers digging so hard into his scalp it nearly drew blood. This truth was crushing him. The entire tech empire he had worshipped was nothing more than an expensive sandbox bought for him by his mother. He had never been a startup genius. He was simply a child protected by a woman who had been far too wealthy and far too patient. But instead of using that money to build something real, what did you do? I said, raising my voice just enough for the entire board to hear. You used my capital to lease the most expensive office in the city. You bought an espresso machine that cost as much as a luxury car. You paid yourself an obscene salary so you could wear tailored suits and let your shallow wife shop for designer handbags. You burned cash faster than you created any real value. And when the money began to run out, you didn't examine your own failures. You went back to my house, locked me in a bedroom, forged medical claims, and tried to steal my retirement home just to keep this fantasy alive. Then I turned to Thomas and gave him a slight nod. By the authority of the shareholder holding 51% of this company, I demand immediate execution of the board's removal resolution. Jason Sterling is no longer chief executive officer. He is no longer an employee of this company. Cancel all of his stock options under the morality and fraud clauses. Freeze every corporate account linked to his name and his wife's name. Effective immediately. He has nothing. Jason looked up at me, tears streaming down his face now. "Mom," he sobbed, using that word with reverence he had not shown in days. "You can't let me go like this. Maya is pregnant. She'll leave me. We don't have savings. We're drowning in credit card debt. Please, just give me one more chance. You'll start over. You'll do anything you want." I watched the tears roll down his face and felt nothing. The heart of the mother who had skipped meals to pay for his education had died the moment he threw that power of attorney onto the dinner table and told me to prepare for a nursing home. "You already had your chance, Jason," I said calmly. Then I turned away from him and began walking toward the boardroom doors. "And you used that chance to destroy your father's keepsakes. Go home and tell Maya the European vacation is canceled. Tell her the two of you have exactly 30 days to get out of the trust house. Start learning how to count every dollar, the way you plan to hand me $100 a week." I walked out of the room, leaving behind the sound of a grown man sobbing on his knees in the wreckage he had built with his own hands. The purge was complete. The silent shareholder had spoken, and the sky of illusion above the ungrateful had finally collapsed. I turned to Thomas. He was still standing there in rigid silence, waiting for instructions from the largest shareholder in the room. "By the authority of the party holding 51% of the company's equity, I am formally calling an emergency vote right here at this table," I declared, my voice ringing through the boardroom. "There will be no delay, no procedural theater, no unnecessary formalities." I let my gaze settle on each member of the board. First item for vote: the immediate termination of Jason Sterling as Chief Executive Officer for financial fraud and gross ethical misconduct. The termination is to be for cause. That means no severance package, no golden parachute, no continued benefits. And every unvested stock grant in his name is to be revoked immediately and returned to the company. All those in favor, raise your hand. I raised mine. Thomas raised his. Technically, my vote alone was already enough to carry the motion. But to make the humiliation complete, I watched as all 20 hands in the room rose with it. Not one of them wanted to drown with the sinking ship called Jason. He had just been thrown out of the very company he claimed to have built with his own 2 hands. Second item for vote: I continued, not giving Jason even a second to breathe. The finance department is to freeze all corporate spending accounts immediately. Every company credit card issued to Jason Sterling or to any member of his household is to be deactivated at once. Recovery of all corporate property will begin this morning. And the moment I finished speaking, a familiar sound shattered the silence. A phone began ringing. Jason's. It was lying on the marble floor beside the spider-webbed remains of its shattered screen, vibrating urgently against the stone. The caller ID flashed one name: Maya. "Answer it, Jason," I said calmly, stepping closer to the phone. "Put her on speaker."
"Let every director in this room hear what your wife is so desperate to report." Jason's hand shook violently as he picked it up. He had lost the ability to resist. Without a word, he swiped the screen and turned on speakerphone. "Jason, what the hell is going on?" Maya's voice exploded through the room, shrill with panic. "I'm at Herm's right now. I was just about to pay for the $12,000 bag I reserved, and your corporate black card was declined. The sales associate said it's been permanently frozen because of a fraud alert. What is happening? You promised we had $3 million. Jason opened his mouth, but his throat locked. No sound came out, and Maya was nowhere near finished. "And another thing, Jason," she screamed. "I tried using my personal credit card to pay for our Paris tickets, and that was declined too. Then I tried 3 different debit cards, and every single one failed. Everyone in the store is staring at me like I'm some kind of criminal. Security just walked over and told me to put the bag down. They are humiliating me in front of every important customer in here. Call the bank right now and fix this." I slowly bent down and aimed my voice directly into the phone. "Good morning, Maya," I said softly. Softly, but with enough venom in it to kill. "Your husband can't call the bank anymore because the person who just froze your entire financial world was me." Silence. Total silence.
Either Maya had dropped the phone or her mind had simply failed to process what she had just heard. "Your house has been reclaimed." I continued delivering the sentence through the speaker with measured precision. "Your husband's company has been taken out of his hands, and all the credit cards you've been using to perform your fake little life of luxury have just become worthless pieces of plastic. How embarrassing for a social media influencer who lectures other people on elegant living to be unable to pay a single bill. You'll have to find your own way home, because I also instructed the company to cancel your husband's ride account." Then I ended the call. The dry beep that followed sounded like the flat line of every illusion they had built. "Mom," Jason said, his voice hoarse and shredded, "you took my company. You ruined our reputation. Are you really trying to leave us with nothing? Maya is carrying your grandchild. Do not ever use that unborn child as a shield for your greed." I cut in my tone sharp enough to stop him cold. "That baby is innocent. But that child will not be brought into this world on money stolen from other people. You had a chance to become a decent father. You had a chance to run this company honestly. Instead, you chose forged medical paperwork. You chose to strip me of my rights. You chose to send me to a nursing home and submit fraudulent documents to a federally insured bank." Then I turned to Thomas and the rest of the board. "You will work with legal counsel immediately. Cut every remaining tie between Jason and this company. Have security escort him out, recover his laptop and office keys, reset every access code, block his server credentials, and seal his office. If he resists in any way, you are authorized to contact the police and have him removed for trespassing." I had nothing left to say to my traitorous son. Every judgment had been issued. Every punishment had been carried out with perfect precision. Arrogant people always think they can overpower the elderly with noise, intimidation, and cruelty. They never understand that real power belongs to the ones who stay silent and hold the decisive documents in their hands. I picked up my handbag and turned my back on the wreckage of Jason kneeling in the center of the room. Once again, the sound of my heels struck the marble floor in clean, decisive beats. Today I had done more than reclaim a company, more than protect the wealth of my lifetime. Today I had proved something far more important. A 62-year-old woman is not some worn-out object waiting to be discarded. We are the ones who built the foundations of this world. And if the ungrateful parasites who live on top of it dare to touch our kingdom, we are fully capable of tearing the whole thing down with our own hands. I left that glittering glass tower and drove back to my house in Westchester. The drive took about 40 minutes. By the time I stepped through the front door, the house was no longer silent the way it had been that morning. From my late husband's study, now littered with broken plaster, smashed furniture, and the wreckage Maya herself had caused the day before, came the sound of loud, hysterical sobbing. It was Maya. She had fled the boutique the moment her cards were declined and rushed straight home to do the one thing she did better than anything else: play the victim online. I walked slowly down the hallway. The study door stood wide open. Maya was sitting on the floor in the middle of the destruction she had created with her own hands. Her phone was mounted on a tripod, the camera aimed directly at her tear-streaked face. She was live again. But this time, there were no gold balloons, no expensive champagne, only the desperate lies of a woman trying to salvage the last scraps of her dignity. "Everyone, I honestly don't know what to do anymore," Maya sobbed into the camera, her voice full of theatrical anguish. "My mother-in-law has completely lost her mind. This morning she had some kind of episode and somehow called the bank and made up all these insane stories to freeze our family's credit cards. She's trying to destroy us. I'm pregnant, and I was humiliated in the middle of a luxury store. She is the cruelest, most vicious woman I have ever known." Thousands of people were watching. Comments were flooding the screen, most of them comforting Maya and hurling vicious insults at me. They called me a bitter old witch. They told her to call the police and have me committed. My daughter-in-law was trying to weaponize the mob on the internet to create a false wave of moral outrage and somehow turn the tide back in her favor. She still didn't understand that in the real world, likes and comments have no legal value. I didn't stand in the doorway and listen any longer. I walked straight into the room. The sound of my heels struck the floor with clean, sharp precision. Maya jerked her head up in shock. The moment she saw me,
Panic flashed across her face, but only for a second. Then she quickly rearranged herself into that wounded, pathetic expression she wore for the camera. "Evelyn," she screamed, making sure the microphone picked up every word. "What the hell did you do to our accounts? Are you trying to kill your own grandchild? Everyone is watching."
"Go ahead, explain yourself." I didn't even look at her. I stepped over the debris and walked straight to the tripod. Then I stood directly in front of her phone, blocking Maya from view entirely. My face filled the screen. I looked straight into the camera. Thousands of strangers were staring at me, expecting some senile old woman to break down on live video. Instead, they saw me exactly as I was. Calm, sharp, powerful, dressed in my navy suit. "Hello to everyone watching this account," I said, my voice low, clear, and perfectly steady. "My name is Evelyn Sterling. I am the cruel, unstable woman you've just heard so much about. I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to put an end to the trash performance you've all been manipulated into watching." I paused just long enough for my silence to suffocate the scrolling comments. People stopped typing. "The woman crying behind me is not a victim," I continued. "Yesterday, she and her husband forced me to sign a power of attorney by threatening to send me to a nursing home. They falsified medical paperwork, claiming I was mentally impaired so the bank would freeze my personal accounts. They hoped I would panic and beg them for my own money. And in this very room, she hired workers to smash the keepsakes of my late husband so she could turn his study into a live-stream studio. Behind me, Maya started screaming, "Turn it off! Turn it off! Right now! She's lying!" She lunged toward the phone, but I only needed one arm. I shoved her back by the shoulder, and she dropped hard onto the floor again. I never took my eyes off the camera. This morning, her husband took documents for this house to the bank and attempted to secure a $3 million loan, I said calmly. But there is one thing they were too stupid to investigate. This house does not belong to me personally. It belongs to an irrevocable trust. They attempted to pledge property they do not own. That is federal bank fraud. Her husband was fired by his board of directors an hour ago. And the reason her credit cards were declined is not because I'm confused. It's because I am the majority shareholder, the person holding 51% of the company where her husband worked. I personally ordered every corporate card she was using to be frozen because she was using stolen money to fund her designer shopping. The comments exploded, but not against me this time. Truth, when delivered with hard evidence, has a way of crushing every tear-soaked lie in its path. Her audience was turning on her. They were beginning to understand they had been defending a ruthless fraud. I looked into the eyes of those thousands of strangers. Then I slowly lowered my gaze to Maya, curled up on the floor, shaking and screaming, in total loss of control. "Maya," I said, and my voice carried the finality of a sentence being pronounced. "You used social media to humiliate me. Now I'm going to use it to remove you. You and your husband have 30 days to get out of my house. Gather your trash and leave. And if you are still here after 30 days, I will have the police remove you for unlawful occupancy." Maya clutched her head, her hair wild and disheveled, and let out a shriek so raw it echoed off the half-destroyed walls. "We have no money. We have nowhere to go. You can't do this. You're a monster." Her voice was shrill, frantic, desperate. She had lost everything, her reputation, her access to money, her home, and the fake victim mask she had spent so much time perfecting. I looked back into the camera one final time. "To every woman my age watching this live stream," I said, "never hand over the keys to your kingdom to people who are only waiting for you to close your eyes. Use power. Use truth. Protect yourself." Then I reached forward and pressed the button to end the stream. The screen went black. Maya's digital world had officially collapsed. I straightened, picked up my handbag, and walked out of the room, leaving my shameless daughter-in-law alone with the destruction she had created for herself. The war was over, and I had taken back the silence of my home. 3 weeks had passed since the day the board of directors threw Jason out of that glittering glass tower. 3 weeks is almost nothing in the span of a lifetime, but it is more than enough time for an empire built on lies to collapse completely. I did not need to leave my house to know what was happening to my son.
The reports from my legal team, combined with the stories now circulating in the local press, painted a perfect picture of his downfall. On a gray Wednesday morning, Agent Harris arrived at Jason's luxury rental apartment with 2 federal officers. They were not carrying balloons. They were not carrying champagne. They were carrying a search warrant and a federal court summons. The charges of bank fraud and wire fraud had now been formally established. Jason was handcuffed and escorted out of the building in full view of his curious neighbors. The press captured every humiliating second of it. The same arrogant tech executive who once strutted through boardrooms in tailored suits was now photographed with his head lowered, trying to hide his cuffed hands beneath a cheap coat. But the real fatal blow did not come from the federal government. It came from the very woman Jason had chosen as his partner in plotting to send me to a nursing home. The moment the federal agents left with boxes of seized documents, Maya called a divorce attorney. Parasitic people always know exactly when to abandon a sinking ship. She filed for divorce on the grounds of financial deception and demanded full custody of the baby. Then she gathered up the last designer items that had not yet been frozen or seized and disappeared. She left Jason alone with catastrophic legal debt and the very real possibility of spending 30 years in federal prison. She had once bragged online that her husband was on the verge of becoming a billionaire. Now she would not even pay his bail. Eventually, Jason managed to scrape together enough money from old friends to secure release while awaiting trial. And the very first place he came was not a law office. He came to me. It was late afternoon. The sky was heavy and gray, and the wind had begun to sharpen with the cold. I was sitting in my warm living room sipping chamomile tea and reading a book when the security alert from the front gate sounded. I reached for the tablet on the coffee table and opened the surveillance feed. Jason was standing outside my 3-meter wrought iron gate. He hardly looked human anymore. His clothes were wrinkled and hanging off him. His hair, once slick and carefully styled, was now disheveled and greasy. He kept pounding the bell, kept slamming both hands against the cold iron bars. On the security screen, his face looked pale and twisted with desperation. He stared straight into the camera mounted on the stone pillar. Over and over I could read the shape of his mouth. "Mom, please open the gate. Please. I've lost everything. Maya left me. They're taking it all. I'm going to prison. Can you tell the investigators it was all a misunderstanding? Can you use the trust to save me? Please, Mom, just this once." Then slowly his knees gave out beneath him. A 35-year-old man who had once stood at the top of his imagined kingdom was now kneeling in the gravel, begging the old woman he had once treated like trash. He bowed his head against the iron gate and began to sob. He was waiting for the miracle of maternal love. He believed that any mother seeing her son on his knees in tears would eventually break. But he had forgotten one thing. My motherhood was not a weapon he could use after every cruel plan he made had failed. I looked at his miserable image on the screen. My heart was as still as a frozen winter lake. Not a ripple of pity moved through me. There comes a point when a person must learn to carry the full weight of the knives they themselves drove into someone else's back. I did not press the button to open the gate. I did not use the intercom to answer him. I simply reached out, touched the screen, and turned the image off. Jason vanished into a quiet rectangle of black. I set the tablet back down on the table, picked up my book, and continued reading where I had left off. Outside, the wind kept blowing, but inside my home, everything had finally returned to its rightful peace. 2 months after the day I stood in front of that camera and cleared the garbage out of my life, everything had finally been settled. I received no more calls from Jason. I did not care whose couch he was sleeping on, or how many hours of questioning he was enduring under federal investigation. A mother's job is to raise her children until they become adults, not to shield a financial criminal from the consequences of his own choices. On a bright Thursday morning, I put on my familiar Navy suit again and drove to Lawrence's law office. This time I was not there to activate a legal trap. I was there to personally sign the papers to sell the Westchester estate for good. A representative from a commercial real estate group was already waiting for me. They wanted to purchase the entire property and redevelop it into a luxury resort. The final price was set at $5,200,000 paid in one lump sum directly into the trust account. I picked up my fountain pen and signed the last page of the contract.
My signature was smooth, decisive. There was no sorrow in it, no hesitation. That house had once been a home, but Jason and Maya's greed had turned it into a battlefield, and when a war is over, the victor never stays behind to cradle the ruins. I slid the contract back across the table, handed over the keys, and offered a polite smile. The transaction was complete. That enormous fixed asset had now become something far more elegant, a flexible liquid number safe and untouchable inside my account. That night, I did not sleep in Westchester. I stayed in a 5-star hotel in Manhattan. The next morning, I took a taxi to John F. Kennedy International Airport. My luggage was light. I carried no dusty keepsakes, no heavy photo albums. The past had already done its job. Now it was time to live for the present, and for myself. I passed through the private priority security gate and walked straight into the first-class cabin of a flight bound for Tuscany, Italy. The cabin was quiet, refined, and beautifully restrained. The soft leather seat wrapped around me like a promise. A flight attendant with a warm, effortless smile placed a glass of top-shelf champagne into my hand. I lifted the glass and listened to the fine bubbles crackle softly against the crystal. Then the plane began to move. It rolled down the runway, and slowly, gracefully, it lifted itself off the ground. I looked through the small oval window and watched New York shrink beneath me. The towers, the traffic, the chaos, and all the men like Jason, who believed power was something you could steal with noise and arrogance. All of it fell away. At 30,000 feet, with cold champagne on my tongue and the clouds opening beneath me, I finally understood what absolute freedom felt like. A freedom purchased with blood, with tears, with 30 years of relentless work, and with a mind cold enough to survive betrayal. So let me say this to every woman listening to this story. Every woman in her 50s, 60s, or even 70s. We have been fed a poisonous illusion our entire lives. Society teaches us that a great mother is a woman who sacrifices herself until her very last breath. It tells us to give the best portion of every meal to our children, to drain our retirement accounts to rescue them from debt, and then when we grow older, to quietly move into a nursing home so the next generation can take the house. They call that love. I call it exploitation, painted in softer colors. Never burn yourself alive just to keep ungrateful people warm. Motherhood is sacred. But it is not a blank check for your children to write their cruelest demands across. When you reach the later chapters of your life, your assets are not just money. They are power. They are your shield. They are what protect you from being trampled by society, and sometimes by the very people who share your blood. Hold tightly to your kingdom. Do not hand over control of your finances to anyone, no matter who they are. Not the child you carried in your body, not the husband you have lived beside for decades. The deed should protect you. The bank account should belong to you. And you should never hesitate to use the law to build walls of steel around your peace, an irrevocable trust, a prenuptial agreement, a transparent will. These are the most loyal bodyguards you will ever have. They do not lie, and they do not betray you for greed. Your life does not end at 60. In many ways, that is where it truly begins. This is the season in which you are finally allowed to be gloriously selfish. Sell the oversized house. Clear the parasites out of your life. Take the money you fought so hard to earn and buy yourself a first-class ticket around the world. Eat the finest meals, watch the richest sunsets, and do not leave your fortune to people who are only waiting for you to die. Spend every last dollar on your own happiness. That is my story. That is how I protected my kingdom. That is how I found my freedom again. And now I want to hear yours. If you are watching this video and you have ever had to stand up against ungrateful family members to protect your assets, your dignity, or your peace, leave your story in the comments. Tell me how you set your boundaries. Tell me how you taught those delusional people a lesson they never forgot. Do not stay silent. Your courage may become the torch that lights the way for another woman still trapped in darkness. So please, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with the women you love. Together we can build a community of older women who are strong, independent, and absolutely unwilling to kneel. Thank you for listening. I'll see you again in the next sharp-edged story. And for now, I'm going to close my eyes and enjoy every second of my flight to Italy. Wishing you a day filled with strength, dignity, and pride.